The grand deliberation chamber of the Galactic Concorde was the most important room in known space. That was not an opinion. It was a fact that every diplomat, every soldier, every trader, and every schoolchild in the galaxy understood from a young age. 83 species had seats inside that chamber. The laws that kept the peace, the agreements that allowed trade, the treaties that stopped wars before they started, all of it came from that one room. It sat at the heart of the Concorde Station, a massive structure that floated in neutral space between 4 star systems, belonging to no one and everyone at the same time. Ambassador Violrin of the Thaldori Compact walked the long outer corridor toward the chamber for the first time, and felt, despite himself, a little nervous. He was tall, even by Thaldori standards. 4 arms, silver-gray skin, and eyes the color of deep water. He had spent 20 years in the diplomatic service. He had brokered trade deals between systems that had not spoken in a century. He was not a man who was easily impressed. But the corridor leading to the chamber was something else. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into shadow. The walls were lined with carved stone panels, each one showing a moment from the history of the Concorde. Species he recognized, species he had only read about. A few he could not name at all. His aide, a young Thaldori named Kel, walked close behind him and said nothing. Kel was new. He had only been assigned to Violrin 3 weeks ago, and he was still learning when to speak and when to stay quiet. He was learning fast. The outer doors of the chamber were open. The session was not due to start for another hour. Delegates were still arriving, still finding their seats, still talking to each other in the low, careful way that diplomats talked when they were being watched. Violrin walked through the doors and stopped just inside. 2 guards stood at the inner doors. He looked at them for a moment. They were human. 2 of them, one on each side of the sealed inner entrance. They stood very still. Not the polished, practiced stillness of a performance. It was something quieter than that. More natural. Like rocks in a river. They were not looking at anyone in particular. They were looking at everything. One was a woman shorter than Violrin by at least a head, dark-skinned, with her hair pulled back tight, and her hands resting loose at her sides. The other was a man, broader, with a calm face that gave away nothing. Both wore the deep gray uniform of Concorde security. Both carried standard-issue sidearms. Nothing special. Nothing that would stop a determined attacker from the 6 or 7 other species in the room who could, by raw physical ability, tear a human apart in seconds. Violrin studied them for a moment longer than was polite. He leaned slightly toward Kel and spoke in a low voice, not quite a whisper but close. "Why are they using humans?" Kel blinked. "Ambassador?" "The guards." Violrin nodded toward the 2 figures at the inner doors. "The Kethara have warriors that can stop plasma rounds with their natural armor. The Vel have reaction speeds 3 times faster than a human baseline. The Doran are twice the size and 4 times the strength. Any one of those species would make more logical sense for a security post in the most important room in the galaxy." He paused. "Humans are not bad fighters. I am not saying that. But they are not exceptional either. They are middle tier in nearly every measurable category. So why are they the ones standing at that door?" Kel had no answer, because Kel did not know, and he was smart enough not to pretend that he did. The question had not been aimed at anyone in particular. Violrin had said it the way you say something when you are thinking out loud, not expecting a response, but a response came anyway. Because of what happened 340 years ago. The voice came from his left. A small figure sat in one of the outer chairs along the chamber wall. A Vel elder, old in a way that was hard to look at directly. Her pale body folded carefully into the seat, like something that had been worn smooth by many years of use. Her eyes were large and dark, the way all Vel eyes were, and they were looking at him with an expression that was not quite amusement, and not quite pity. Something in between. He had not noticed her when he walked in. That bothered him more than he let show. "Counselor Sirith," Kel murmured at his side, very quietly. Valerin knew the name. Everyone in the diplomatic service knew the name. Cirith of the Vel had been on the council for over 900 years. Her species lived long. She had been present for the signing of the Second Concord. She had personally negotiated the end of the Pale War. She was, by any measure, one of the most experienced diplomats in known space. She did not look offended by what she had overheard. She did not look annoyed. She looked, if anything, like she had been waiting for exactly this question, and had a great deal of time to enjoy the answer. "You are not the first person to ask that question," she said. Her voice was slow and careful, the way very old people speak when they are not in a hurry, and have learned that rushing words is a waste of good time. "You will not be the last." She tilted her head slightly toward the empty seat beside her. "But perhaps you would like to sit down before I tell you." Valerin looked at the two humans by the door. They had not moved. They had not reacted to the conversation at all. They were still doing what they had been doing before, watching everything, quietly, without expression. He sat down. "Good," said Cirith, and she began to talk. Counselor Cirith did not start with the attack. She started before it, the way a good storyteller always does, because the attack only made sense if you understood what came before it. She said that for the first 200 years of the Concord, guard duty at the chamber rotated among the four most militarily powerful species in the Alliance: the Cathara, the Vel, the Doran, and the Myraxan. The logic was simple, and it seemed sound. If you wanted to protect something important, you used the strongest, fastest, most dangerous soldiers available. No one questioned it. It worked without serious incident for a long time. The Cathara were creatures built for war. Their bodies were covered in a natural shell that had evolved over millions of years on a violent, predator-heavy world. They could absorb weapon fire that would kill most species outright. Their strength was extraordinary. A single Cathara soldier standing at a door was, by most calculations, more than enough to stop any physical threat. The Vel, Cirith's own people, were fast, faster than almost anything in the known galaxy. Their nervous systems processed information at a rate that made them seem almost to move before a threat had fully begun. They were not large, they were not strong, but they did not need to be. By the time most attackers had finished the first motion of an assault, a Vel soldier had already responded. The Doran were simply massive, enormous thick-limbed beings from a high-gravity world. They were difficult to stop by almost any means. Their presence alone was a deterrent. No one wanted to fight a Doran if they could avoid it. And the Myraxan had weapons built into their bodies, chemical defenses, biological agents they could deploy at will, things that made a Myraxan in a confined space extremely dangerous to approach without permission. "So you had 4 excellent options," Valerin said. "We had 4 options that we believed were excellent," Cirith corrected him, gently. "There is a difference. 340 years ago, during the negotiations for the Third Accord, a group of extremists from within one of the member species decided that the Accord had to be stopped. Their reasons do not matter now. What matters is what they planned and how they planned it. They did not try to fight their way into the chamber. That would have been pointless. The security was too strong for a direct assault. Instead, they spent 4 years studying the guards, all 4 species. They observed shift patterns, communication habits, physical responses. They ran tests from a distance. They built over those 4 years an incredibly detailed picture of exactly how each species processed danger. The Cathara, they discovered, relied heavily on scent recognition. Their threat response was deeply tied to smell, not consciously, but biologically. They had evolved on a world where the difference between a safe creature and a deadly one was often a chemical signal. When something smelled right, some deep part of the Cathara brain said, "Not a threat." The extremists used this. They engineered a chemical disguise so precise that the Cathara guards smelled nothing wrong, even as the attackers stood directly in front of them. The guards did not freeze. They did not hesitate. They simply did not register the people standing before them as a danger. The Vel guards were neutralized differently. The extremists had learned that the Vel visual system, extraordinary as it was in most ways, had a specific weakness, a frequency of light outside the normal visible spectrum that caused temporary disruption. A single pulse device, hidden in what appeared to be a standard diplomatic badge, blinded both Vel guards completely for approximately 40 seconds. 40 seconds was more than enough. They had backup plans for the Dauren and the Maraxan as well. The Dauren could be slowed with a targeted sonic weapon tuned to frequencies their inner structure could not handle. The Maraxan's chemical defenses could be suppressed with a neutralizing agent introduced into the air system in advance. In each case, the same method. Learn the species, find the limit, exploit it precisely. They knew, Vauren said slowly. They knew, Sarith agreed. Every species has fixed limits. Every species evolved in a particular environment, facing particular threats. Their bodies and their instincts are shaped by those threats. A Kethera's nose is a product of its world. A Vel's eyes are a product of its world. And if you study a species carefully enough, you can find the edge of what they were built for, and then go just slightly past it. She was quiet for a moment. In the room around them, delegates continued to drift in and take their seats. No one paid attention to the old Vel counselor and the new Thaldori ambassador sitting along the wall. 7 delegates died, she said. The High Chancellor at the time survived only because a structural pillar happened to be between him and the attack at the moment it began. Luck, nothing more. The Third Accord nearly collapsed entirely. It took 11 years of additional negotiation to reach an agreement that most of the original parties were willing to sign. Vaelrin sat with that for a moment. After that, Sarith continued, the Security Directorate began a review. The question they asked was, is there a species that cannot be defeated this way? Is there a species whose threat response does not have a fixed edge that can be found and exploited? And the answer was humans, Vaelrin said. The answer, said Sarith, was more complicated than that. But yes, eventually, the answer was humans. She paused. Though I think it will help you to understand why. The answer is not as simple as humans being better. It is more interesting than that. She nodded across the room. A figure was walking toward them, a small, quick-moving being with 4 fingers on each hand, and the pale complexion of someone who spent most of their life indoors. He wore the badge of the Concord's Science and Research Division. I asked Dr. Ilixon to join us, Sarith said. He can explain the biology better than I can. I am a diplomat, not a scientist. The small figure reached them, nodded to both with the polite efficiency of someone who had explained the same thing many times before, and had stopped finding it awkward, and sat down in the chair on Sarith's other side. Ambassador, he said to Vaelrin, you want to know why humans guard the chamber. I am beginning to understand why it is a longer answer than I thought, Vaelrin said. Good, said Dr. Ilixan. That means you are paying attention. Dr. Ilixan had the manner of a person who had spent most of his life thinking carefully and speaking precisely. He did not waste words. He did not make the explanation sound exciting in a way that distorted it. He simply told the truth, clearly, in the order that made the most sense. Most species, he began, evolved in stable environments. I don't mean easy environments. Many of them were extremely harsh, but stable. The threats were consistent. The same predators, the same seasonal dangers, the same territorial pressures generation after generation for thousands of years. This is how a species' threat response gets shaped. The brain learns what danger looks like in its world, and it builds a very efficient system for recognizing those specific things. Vaelrin nodded slowly. He was listening carefully now. This is very effective, Ilixan continued. A species that evolved alongside a specific predator develops extremely precise recognition for that predator. Its threat response fires fast, accurately, and reliably. In its home environment, this is an enormous advantage. But it also means that threat response has a shape, a boundary. Things inside the boundary are recognized as danger. Things outside it may not be. The way the Cathara did not recognize the scent-disguised attackers, Veilrin said. Exactly. The Cathara nose is extraordinarily sensitive, but it is calibrated. It was built by millions of years of evolution on one particular world to detect the specific chemical signatures of the creatures on that world. An entirely synthetic, artificially constructed scent disguise was simply outside the range of what the system was built to handle. Not because the Cathara are weak, because they are extremely well adapted to a specific place. Ilixan paused. Now, humans. He sat forward slightly, his hands folded together. Humans evolved on a world that by most measures should not have produced a dominant species at all. Earth is a planet of radical, rapid change. Ice ages, volcanic events, shifting coastlines, mass extinctions. The continent they evolved on saw at least 4 significant climate collapses during their development as a species. The megafauna they shared their world with could kill them easily. They were not the fastest animal, not the strongest, not the most armored. They did not have venom or claws or the ability to sense electrical fields. By raw physical comparison, they were unremarkable. Then how did they survive? Kel asked from behind Veilrin. He seemed to have forgotten that he was new and should probably not be speaking. To his credit, neither Cirith nor Ilixan seemed bothered by the question. Adaptability, Ilixan said, and a very unusual kind of threat detection. He looked at Veilrin. Most species, when they perceive a threat, have a response that is triggered by specific signals. A shape, a smell, a sound, a pattern of movement. The trigger is clear. It has a definition. Humans do not have this, or rather, they have it, but underneath it, they have something else, something older. What? Veilrin asked. A response to wrongness, Ilixan said. The word sat in the air for a moment. Veilrin turned it over. Not wrong in a moral sense, Ilixan added. Wrong in the sense of something is not as it should be. Something is out of place. Something does not fit the pattern. He leaned back. Humans are a deeply social species. They have been living in groups, reading each other, reading their environment, building mental pictures of what normal looks like, for a very long time. When something deviates from normal, even in a small way, even in a way they cannot immediately identify or explain, they notice. The system fires, not because they saw a predator, not because they smelled danger, because something in the picture was not quite right. This is what makes them hard to fool, Cirith said quietly. Extremely hard, Ilixan agreed. You cannot give a human guard a scent disguise, because a human is not primarily using scent. You cannot blind them with a frequency weapon tuned to their visual system, because their threat detection is not anchored in vision alone. It is distributed. It uses everything at once, and compares the result against an internal model of what that specific environment, with those specific people, on that specific day, should look and feel and sound and smell like. Any deviation from that model, any deviation at all, is noticed. Veilrin looked at the 2 guards by the inner doors again. The woman had shifted her weight slightly to her left foot. Nothing else had changed. But there is more, Ilixan said. The threat detection is only part of it. The other part is what they do with it. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. Most species, when experiencing genuine mortal fear, the kind that comes when the brain fully registers that death is possible and immediate, have 2 primary responses: fight or flee. Both are useful. Both have kept species alive for millions of years, but they are both at their core automatic. The body takes over, the thinking stops, or is reduced. The system runs on instinct. Humans have a third response, said Cirith. Humans have a third response, Ilixan confirmed. We do not have a perfect name for it in Standard. In their own primary language, they call it courage. But that word is too simple for what it actually describes biologically. What it describes is this: a human, in the grip of genuine mortal fear, can choose to act against the fear. The brain registers the danger fully. It produces all the correct signals: elevated heart rate, adrenaline response, threat assessment running at maximum speed. And then, in the same moment, the higher cognitive function looks at all of that and makes a decision that the instinct is not correct. That staying is better than running. That the thing in front of them needs to be dealt with, even if dealing with it might end in death. The room was quiet. Somewhere across the chamber, two delegates were arguing in low voices about something related to shipping tariffs. "We have a clinical term for it in xenobiology," Ilixon said. "Threat-induced aggression override. But the human term is more honest. Courage is exactly what it is. The ability to be afraid, genuinely, fully afraid, and to act anyway." He looked at Veilrin directly. "No system can neutralize that. You cannot engineer a way around it because it is not a biological mechanism with a fixed trigger. It is a choice, made in the middle of fear, every single time." Veilrin was still looking at the guards, the woman at the door, the man. He had looked at them before, as people who did not seem particularly impressive. He was not sure he was looking at them the same way now. "The Concord tested 47 species before recommending humans for the post," Ilixon said. "Humans were not the fastest to qualify. They were not the easiest to train. They were not the cheapest option. But they were the only species in the study that, when presented with a simulated threat specifically designed to exploit their biological limitations, consistently found ways to respond anyway." He stood up, indicating that his part of the explanation was finished. "Not always perfectly, but always." He gave a small nod to Sirith, a slightly larger one to Veilrin, and walked away toward the other side of the chamber. Veilrin sat quietly for a moment. "He explained it well," he said at last. "He always does," said Sirith. "He has had a lot of practice." The session began on time. 83 delegations found their seats in the wide bowl of the chamber floor. The inner doors opened, and the assembled diplomats filed in with the careful, deliberate movement of people who understood that what they said and did in this room would be recorded and studied for centuries. Valen found his assigned seat in the Thaldori section, 3 rows back from the main floor, with a good view of both the speaker's platform and the doors. Kel sat to his right, pad open, ready to take notes. The session agenda was routine: a vote on revised shipping corridor rights in the outer belt systems, something that would affect trade for the next 30 years, but would not, in any dramatic sense, change the course of the galaxy. The 2 human guards had moved with the inner doors. Now they stood inside the chamber itself, one on each side of the main entrance arch. Their names, Valen knew now from the morning briefing all senior delegates receive, were Sergeant Priya Okafor and Corporal Damian Reyes. Sergeant Okafor was the woman with the dark skin and the careful eyes. Corporal Reyes was the broader man with the calm face. They had taken up their positions as the delegates entered, and had not moved since. The session opened. The Speaker of the Concord began the formal proceedings. Valen listened with one part of his mind, and almost against his will, watched the 2 guards with another part. He was thinking about what Ilixon had said, about wrongness, about the mental model of what normal looks like. He found himself trying to see the room the way a human might see it, trying to track the baseline, the expected pattern of motion and sound and behavior in a room full of 83 species of diplomat, doing what diplomats do. The thought made his head hurt after about 90 seconds, and he gave it up. 47 minutes into the session, nothing had happened. The vote on the first shipping corridor amendment had passed without significant argument. The second was being introduced. Veilrin was reading the technical detail in the amendment text and thinking about which way the Thaldori Compact's interests pointed when something changed in the room. He did not hear anything. He did not see anything unusual, but he felt in some vague and unspecific way that something had shifted. He looked up from the text. Sergeant Okafor had moved. Not dramatically, not with any visible alarm. She had taken 3 steps away from her post at the door, smooth and quiet, and had positioned herself between the main delegate seating area and the speaker's platform, in a way that was, now that Valrin looked at it, not casual at all. She was standing where she could reach either the speaker or the front delegate row within 2 seconds. Her hands were still loose at her sides. Her face had not changed. Then she said, in a voice that was calm and flat and carried through the room without being loud, "Everybody stay seated." The chamber went silent. Not immediately. It took about a second for the words to reach every corner, and for every species present to process them. But then, it was very quiet. At the side entrance, Corporal Reyes had moved to stand in front of the door. His hand was on the door handle, not his weapon. His eyes were on the 3rd row of the Western delegation seating block. Specifically, on one being, a diplomat from the Ferath Collective, a species Valrin recognized by their 4-jointed limbs and the smooth gray tone of their skin. The delegate was sitting perfectly still, not the way people sit still when they are paying careful attention to a speaker. Still in the way of something that has already made a decision and is waiting for the right moment to act on it. Valrin had not noticed it before. He noticed it now. He had not seen it because he had not been looking for it. The Ferath delegate had passed every scan, had the correct credentials, had attended 2 previous sessions without incident. By every system and process available to Concord security, this delegate was exactly what they appeared to be. The delegate moved. It was fast, very fast. The Ferath Collective were not known as a physically aggressive species, but this particular being moved with the speed of someone who had prepared for this specific moment for a long time. They came up out of their seat with something in their hand, a device, small and flat, that was not in any scan record because it had been constructed inside the building from components that individually read as harmless. The next 8 seconds were not clean or quiet or elegant. They were messy and fast and very loud. Reyes hit the door first, blocking it, because the attacker's path, if they got past Okafor, would have taken them toward the main exit, and a device discharged in a crowded corridor would have been as bad as anything that could happen inside the chamber. He was there before the attacker had fully stood up. How he had read where the being would go, Valrin could not say. Okafor crossed the distance between herself and the attacker in the same moment. She did not draw her weapon. The chamber was full of delegates. The stone walls would scatter a discharge in ways that were unpredictable. She did not draw her weapon, and in that same half-second, Valrin understood that she had already calculated this, that the decision had been made before she moved, that every action she took in the next 8 seconds was going to be done by hand, because a weapon was the wrong tool in this room. The attacker was larger than her. The attacker was faster than the average member of their species. The attacker had the advantage of preparation and adrenaline and a specific plan. Okafor had the advantage of having spent the last 47 minutes watching the room and knowing exactly where this was going to happen. She reached the attacker before the device could be fully activated. She controlled the hand holding the device first, not the body, the hand, with a grip that looked straightforward and was not. There was a brief, brutal struggle that lasted approximately 4 seconds and ended with the attacker on the chamber floor, face down, arms locked. The device was on the floor, 3 feet away, still sealed. Okafor was kneeling on the attacker's back with her full weight, her left hand holding both of the attacker's wrists, her right elbow pointed at a specific angle that made it clear that any attempt to move would result in something breaking. She had 3 fingers on her left hand bent in a direction they were not supposed to bend. She had not made a sound when they broke. Reyes had not moved from the door. He was still there, still blocking it, still watching the room, not the attacker, the room, for any sign of a second threat. His face had the same expression it had had when the session started. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the speaker's security team began moving, then the medical team, Then the quiet, efficient machinery of Concord security took over, and the attacker was restrained and removed, and the chamber began the slow, shaky process of returning to something like normal. High Chancellor Dorn had not left her seat. She was alive. She looked shaken, but she was alive. Valrin realized he was gripping the edge of his seat with all four hands. He looked at Okafor. She was standing now, stepping back to let the security team work, flexing the fingers of her left hand carefully. 3 of them were clearly wrong. Her face was the same as it had been at the start of the session. If she was in pain, it was not visible. If she was afraid, that was not visible either. She was simply doing the next thing, the same way she had done everything before it. Watching the room, checking the exits, being exactly where she needed to be. Kel, beside Valrin, had not spoken since the moment Okafor said, "Stay seated." He was staring at the door guard with an expression that Valrin had never seen on his face before. Valrin understood it. He felt something similar. The session was suspended. That was the formal term. Suspended, pending review, pending a full security assessment, pending interviews with all delegates present. In practice, it meant that 83 delegations stood around in the outer corridor, in various states of shock, while Concord security moved through the chamber with the slow, thorough attention of people who were going to make absolutely sure there was not a second device somewhere that no one had noticed yet. Valrin stood near the outer wall with Kel, who had still not said very much. Around them, clusters of delegates talked in low voices. Several had the particular look of people trying to appear calmer than they were. Valrin recognized it, because he suspected he was wearing something similar. A medical team had taken Corporal Reyes aside briefly and cleared him without much fuss. He had come away from the 8 seconds with nothing worse than a bruised forearm, which he appeared to regard as not worth mentioning. Sergeant Okafor was being seen to near the far end of the corridor. Valrin watched from a distance as a medic wrapped her left hand with careful efficiency. 3 fingers. He had been right. She sat on the bench with the posture of someone who had sat on many benches in many corridors, waiting for many things, and none of it had ever been particularly comfortable. And she had long ago made her peace with that fact. He did not plan to walk over. It was not the most sensible thing to do. She was being treated, she would be giving her report, she had a great many things that needed her attention that were considerably more important than a conversation with a diplomat who had arrived that morning and asked a mildly rude question about the competence of the guards. But he walked over anyway. She looked up as he approached. She did not seem surprised to see him, which he found, for some reason, vaguely unsettling, as though she had watched him decide to come and had simply waited for him to arrive. "Ambassador," she said. "Sergeant." He stood at what he hoped was a respectful distance from the medical work. "I wanted to ask, if it is appropriate, how you knew." The medic glanced at him, then at Okafor, then went back to the wrapping, with the professional discretion of someone who had learned not to be curious about the conversations happening around them. Okafor was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone deciding whether to answer. The quiet of someone finding the right words for something that did not have very easy words. "He hadn't looked at the exits," she said. Valrin waited. When people are nervous in that room, and almost everyone in that room is nervous at least a little, because it is that kind of room, they look at the exits. Not consciously, usually. They don't realize they're doing it. It's just what a nervous person does in an unfamiliar space. They check where the doors are. Even people who've been in the chamber 20 times still do it. She shifted her hand slightly to let the medic work on the last finger. He'd been in the chamber twice before. "I checked the records this morning, standard procedure. The first time, he looked at the exits 4 times in the first 10 minutes. Normal. The second time, twice. Also normal. Getting more comfortable. Today, not once." She paused. He already knew where the exits were. He'd already decided where he was going. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. Valrin stood with that for a moment. It was such a small thing, such a quiet, specific human thing, the tracking of where people's eyes went in an unfamiliar room, the recognition that a man who did not look at the doors had already made a decision about the doors, the understanding that readiness and nervousness look different from each other even when both are still. No scanner would have caught that, he said. No, she agreed. Scanners look for things. I look for what's missing. He considered asking more questions. He had a list of them forming, actually. He wanted to know how long she had been watching the delegate. He wanted to know when exactly she had decided to move, and how she had calculated the timing, and whether she had been afraid during the 8 seconds, or after them, or at all. But he looked at the wrapped hand, and the medic still working, and at the way she was sitting, not in pain exactly, but not comfortable either, and dealing with both without complaint. And he decided the questions could wait for a better time. Are you in pain? He asked instead. Yes, she said, without hesitation and without drama. Does it affect your performance? She looked at him. Not with irritation, not with pride, with something more direct than either of those things. The look of someone who has been asked a question that has an obvious answer, and is mildly curious about why the person asking it does not already know the answer. I'm standing here, aren't I? She said. He left her to the medic and walked back to where Kel was standing. His aide looked at him with an expression that was half question and half something harder to name. Well? Kel said. Well, Valrin said, and stopped, because he was not entirely sure how to finish the sentence. He stood in the corridor for a while, watching the activity without seeing much of it. Around him, the suspended session slowly reorganized itself. Reports were being filed. The Security Directorate was already deep in its review. Delegates were being interviewed one by one and released. The machinery of the Concorde, disrupted briefly, was reassembling with the quiet resilience of something that had been disrupted before and had learned to reassemble quickly. That night, in his temporary quarters on the station, Valrin sat at his desk for a long time before he wrote his standard debrief report. He wrote about the session. He wrote about the suspended proceedings. He wrote an accurate account of the security incident in the correct format for diplomatic records. And then he wrote one additional section, marked personal observation, which was not required, but which he included anyway. He wrote that he had arrived at the Concorde station that morning with a question about why humans were used to guard the chamber. He wrote that by the end of the day, he no longer had the question. He wrote that what made humans effective as guardians was not their strength, or their speed, or any single measurable quality, but rather the way they processed the world. Not looking for specific danger signals that their biology was built to recognize, but watching everything, building a picture of what normal looked like, and responding to the absence of normal with the same alertness that other species reserved for the presence of a known threat. He wrote that the most remarkable thing he had observed was not the 8 seconds. The 8 seconds were impressive, but they were the result, not the cause. The cause was 47 minutes of quiet watching, and the recognition of a man who had not looked at the exits. He wrote that a human guard did not wait to see danger. A human guard noticed the shape of the space where danger would come from, and stood in that space before the danger arrived. He paused for a long time over the last line. Then he wrote it. I will not ask the question again, nor should you. He sent the report and sat back and thought, for a moment, about the look on Sirith's face when he had first asked the question. Not offended, not annoyed. Amused. Patient. The look of someone who had seen this exact conversation play out many times before, and knew precisely where it always ended. He thought about the sergeant, sitting on the bench with 3 broken fingers, answering a stranger's questions with the same flat calm she had worn all day, as though the broken fingers and the 8 seconds and the man on the floor were simply things that had happened, things that were part of the job, things that did not require anyone to make a large deal out of them. I am standing here, aren't I? He turned off the desk light and went to sleep. In the morning there would be more sessions, more votes, more of the long, slow work of keeping 83 species in agreement with each other. The chamber doors would be sealed, the guards would be at their posts, and Valrin of the Thaldori Compact would not look at them and see something unremarkable.